"I still remember what happened last night," the Apache woman told the cattle rancher who saved her. The sun had just begun its slow rise over the wide plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy smell of dew and grass. John, a cattle rancher who had spent his entire life on this remote ranch, was already up and moving. His morning routine was simple but comforting. First, he checked on his cattle, counting each one carefully as they grazed quietly. The ranch was his life, a place of hard work and peace, and he knew every hill, every tree, and every water source like the back of his hand. That morning, however, felt different. As John walked along the fence line, he noticed something unusual near the edge of the forest that bordered his property. At first, he thought it might be an animal, perhaps a deer caught in the morning mist, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a person. A woman sitting on the ground, her clothes torn and dusty, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. She looked completely alone, as though the world had abandoned her. John instinctively slowed his pace, unsure of what he would find. He had seen travelers before, people passing through the plains, but nothing like this. The woman seemed fragile, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself, even in her exhaustion. She flinched as he approached, and John quickly raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "Hey there," he said gently. "You're safe now. Don't worry." The woman's eyes darted around as if expecting someone or something to appear from the trees. Her breathing was shallow, and John could see scratches on her arms and legs. She tried to speak, but only a soft, shaky sound came out. John realized she was probably injured and scared. Without hesitation, John walked closer, carrying a blanket from his truck. "Here, this will help," he said softly, draping it over her shoulders. The warmth seemed to bring her some comfort. She looked at him with wary eyes, studying him as if trying to decide whether she could trust him. After a long moment, she nodded slightly, just enough to show a hint of acceptance. John helped her to her feet, supporting her as they slowly walked back toward the ranch. With each step, he noticed how tired she was, how her body trembled from exhaustion. He kept talking in a calm, reassuring voice. "You don't have to worry. I'll take care of you. There's water and food waiting, and you can rest as long as you need." As they reached the ranch house, John could see the relief in her eyes. The small wooden home, with smoke rising from the chimney, felt like a safe haven to her. Inside, he guided her to a chair near the fireplace. He could see her shaking slightly from the cold, so he lit a small fire, letting the warmth fill the room. John went to the kitchen, filling a cup with warm water and another with tea. He also brought some bread and dried fruit, simple food but enough to give her energy. When he returned, the woman, who he learned was called Maka, accepted the tea with trembling hands. She sipped it slowly, as though afraid it might disappear if she drank too fast. John watched her carefully, understanding that trust could not be forced. I don't know where to go," Maka finally whispered, her voice soft and uncertain. I don't know who I can trust." John nodded. "It's okay. You're not alone anymore. You can stay here as long as you need." Maka looked at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and sorrow. There was a long pause as she seemed to gather her courage, finally speaking. "I was running last night," she said quietly, almost as if saying it aloud made it real. Someone, they were chasing me." John felt a chill run down his spine. He had lived in this area for decades and had always known that danger existed, but it rarely touched people directly. Yet here she was, a stranger in need, and he knew he had to help. "Whatever happened, it's over now," he said calmly. "You're safe here. I won't let anyone hurt you." For the next few hours, John focused on helping Maka recover. He cleaned her minor wounds and bandaged them carefully, all the while keeping his tone gentle and reassuring. He asked questions, but only when it seemed appropriate, never pushing too hard. Maka answered slowly, giving only small pieces of her story. As the day went on, Maka began to relax slightly. The fear in her eyes softened, replaced with curiosity about the ranch and the life John lived. She asked about the cattle, the routines, and the wide-open plains. John explained everything in simple terms, enjoying the opportunity to share his world with someone new. He could see that Maka had been through a lot, but she had also survived. Her resilience amazed him. Even in her weakened state, there was a spark of determination, a refusal to give up despite the fear that haunted her. John admired that quietly, knowing that helping her heal would be more than just tending to her physical wounds. It would be about restoring her confidence, her sense of safety, and her trust in others. As evening approached, the sky turning deep blue and purple, John prepared a simple dinner. They ate quietly, the only sounds being the crackling fire and the occasional call of a distant bird. Maka ate slowly, still wary, but each bite seemed to bring her a little closer to feeling at home. After dinner, John brought a blanket for her to sleep on a small cot by the fireplace. "You need rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." Maka nodded, her eyes heavy with fatigue. She lay down, wrapped in the warmth of the blanket, and for the first time since the morning, she seemed at peace. John watched over her for a moment, reflecting on how unexpected this encounter had been. He had always lived a life of routine, of hard work and quiet solitude, but now his world had changed. A stranger's trust had been placed in his hands, and he knew he could not let her down. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees outside and the stars shone brightly over the plains, John sat by the fire, thinking about the journey that had brought Maka to his ranch. He didn't yet know the full story of what had happened to her, but he understood one thing clearly. Sometimes life brings people together in ways that are unexpected, and sometimes those moments change everything. Maka slept quietly, her breathing slowing as exhaustion took over. John knew the road ahead might be difficult, but he was ready to face it. He had offered her safety, and in doing so, he had opened the door to a story that was only just beginning. The night was calm, but in both their hearts, a sense of hope was quietly growing. A hope that no matter what had happened before, there could still be light after darkness. The morning sun filtered softly through the windows, warming the room where Maka had spent her first night. In safety. She stirred slowly, her body still stiff and sore from the ordeal of the previous night. The warmth of the fire and the comfort of the blankets had offered her a brief reprieve, but the memories of what had happened were still vivid and raw in her mind. John had already risen, tending to the morning chores as quietly as he could. He knew that before the day became fully busy, it was important to let Maka feel safe and ready to speak. He brought her a small cup of warm tea and a plate of soft bread. The aroma alone seemed to calm her, and she accepted it with a faint, grateful smile. After a few minutes of quiet sipping, Maka's eyes met John's. There was hesitation in her gaze, but also a flicker of trust that had begun to grow. I think I can tell you now," she said softly, her voice almost trembling. "About last night." John nodded, encouraging her gently. "Take your time. Start wherever you feel comfortable." Maka took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I was traveling, trying to reach my family. They live a few valleys over. I thought I would arrive before nightfall, but something went wrong." Her hands trembled as she folded them in her lap. "I was ambushed. A group of men, they wanted to take supplies, money, anything they could find. I tried to hide, to run, but they chased me." John listened carefully, his expression calm but alert. "Did they hurt you?" he asked softly. Maka swallowed hard. "No, not too badly, just scratches, cuts, but the fear, it was worse than the pain. I had never felt anything like it. They said that anyone who resisted would regret it. I ran as fast as I could through the forest, over rocks, through streams. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept running, hoping I could survive." John felt a mixture of concern and admiration. He had faced dangers himself on the ranch, but nothing like this. He realized how brave Maka had been, how she had relied on her courage and instincts to escape a terrifying situation. "They didn't catch you?" he asked, leaning closer. Maka shook her head. "No, I don't know why. Maybe they gave up. Maybe they thought I was gone, but I couldn't stop running until I found a place that felt safe. And then I saw your ranch." She paused, her eyes glistening. "I don't even know how I got here. I was so scared I didn't think anyone would help me." John offered a reassuring smile. "You made it. You're safe now. No one can hurt you here." For a long moment, Maka seemed lost in thought, reliving every terrifying step of her escape. The forest she had fled through was dense, full of shadows that seemed to move on their own in her memory. The sound of her own heartbeat had echoed in her ears as she ran. Each branch that snapped under her feet, each rustle in the leaves, had felt like a threat. And yet somehow she had survived. "I don't know how I kept going," Maka admitted quietly. "I wanted to stop so many times. I wanted to just fall down. But I remembered my family. I remembered the stories my grandmother told me about our people. About never giving up, about being strong even when it seems impossible. That's what kept me moving." John nodded thoughtfully. "That's very brave of you. It takes a lot of courage to keep going when everything feels against you." Maka looked at him, a faint smile forming despite the fear still lingering in her eyes. "I think meeting you was part of that courage too. I didn't know anyone could be kind after what happened. I didn't know anyone would care." John felt a warmth in his chest. He had always believed that helping others was simply part of living a good life, but hearing Maka speak of trust and hope reminded him why it mattered so much. "People can surprise you," he said softly, "and sometimes kindness comes when you need it most." The morning passed slowly as Maka continued to tell her story in fragments, each memory a mixture of fear and determination. She described the forest, the narrow paths, the sounds of animals that had startled her as she ran. She spoke of hiding in small clearings, listening for the footsteps of the men who had chased her, waiting for the moment she could escape again. John listened without interruption, only asking gentle questions when necessary, making sure she felt heard and understood. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Maka's fear began to soften. The room, once filled with the tension of her story, now felt like a safe space where she could breathe again. She noticed small details in John's ranch, the gentle way he moved among the cattle, the care he took in simple tasks, the quiet determination in his eyes. It was a life far removed from the chaos she had escaped, yet it felt grounding, a place where she could begin to heal. "You know," Maka said after a while, her voice quieter, "I was sure last night would be the end of me. I didn't know if I would survive until morning, and now here I am. It feels strange to be alive, to be safe. I'm not used to it." John smiled kindly. "It's okay to feel that way. Surviving something terrible doesn't mean the fear disappears overnight. It just means you're strong enough to face it." Maka nodded slowly, taking in his words. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. The hope that perhaps there could be a future beyond the terror she had endured. The hope that she could trust someone again. And the hope that she could find her way back to her family. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, John suggested a short walk outside. "Sometimes a little fresh air helps," he said. Maka agreed, and they stepped out into the open fields. The grass swayed gently in the breeze, the sky a brilliant mix of orange and gold. The world felt calm, almost magical in its simplicity. Walking together, Maka explained more about her life, her heritage, and her connection to her family and community. John listened intently, fascinated by her stories. She spoke of traditions, of values that had been passed down through generations, and of the strength that came from knowing who she was. It was a world different from John's ranch life, yet he felt a deep respect for her resilience and wisdom. "You've been through so much," John said quietly, "but you're still standing. That's something few people could do." Maka smiled faintly. I had to. I couldn't stop, not even when I wanted to. And meeting you made a difference too. You saved me when I had nothing left. John shook his head. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just did what felt right. They walked in silence for a while, the soft sounds of nature around them. Birds chirped in the distance and the wind rustled through the leaves. Maka felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in days, maybe weeks. She realized that though the night had been terrifying, it had also led her here, to someone willing to help without judgment or expectation. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the fields, Maka knew she had survived something harrowing, but she also knew that survival was only the beginning. There were still challenges ahead, reuniting with her family, finding her own safety in the long term, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face them. Returning to the ranch house, they prepared a small meal together. Maka's hands were still shaky, but she helped as much as she could. John appreciated her effort, not because it was necessary, but because it showed her growing trust in him and the sense of normalcy slowly returning. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Maka reflected quietly on the day. She had faced fear, run for her life, and yet she had also experienced kindness, safety, and understanding. It was a strange mix, but it was real. And it was enough to give her the strength to continue forward. John looked at her, seeing both the scars and the spark that made her who she was. "You're stronger than you think," he said gently, "and you won't have to face anything alone anymore." Maka nodded, her heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. She knew the road ahead might still be difficult, but she also knew that with trust, courage, and the kindness of someone like John, she could survive anything. That night, as the fire crackled softly and the stars shone outside, Maka finally felt a sense of calm. She had survived the night, and now, for the first time in days, she could begin to heal. The next morning, the ranch seemed quieter than usual. The birds sang softly, and the sunlight poured across the fields, touching every corner with warmth. John was already outside, tending to the cattle, when Maka stepped out onto the porch. She stretched carefully, feeling the stiffness in her muscles from the run and the injuries she had suffered the night before. Yet, there was something different in her steps now, a quiet confidence that had not been there when she first arrived. John noticed it too. "Morning," he called softly. "Sleep well?" Maka nodded. "Better than I expected," she replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "Thank you for everything." John shook his head. "It's nothing, you're safe now, that's all that matters." There was a pause as Maka looked over the wide expanse of land. The cattle moved slowly across the pasture, and the gentle sway of the grass in the breeze seemed almost magical. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "It feels peaceful. I haven't felt peace in a long time." John nodded, understanding her completely. He had spent his whole life in these fields, sometimes lonely but always at peace with the rhythm of nature. Seeing her take notice of the simple beauty made him feel proud, in a quiet way, that he could share this part of his world with her. Over the course of the morning, John guided Maka through the small tasks around the ranch. He showed her how he tended to the cattle, checked fences, and ensured that the water sources were clean and plentiful. Maka watched carefully, asking questions about why certain things were done in particular ways. She was curious and eager to understand, and John admired her attentiveness. "You have a good way with animals," John observed. "They seem to trust you." Maka laughed softly. "I think they can tell I won't hurt them. Animals, they sense fear, but they also sense kindness." John smiled at her insight. It was true. Over the years, he had learned that animals responded to the energy around them, just as humans did. Watching Maka connect with the cattle reminded him of her strength, quiet, patient, and deeply understanding. After the morning chores, they returned to the house for lunch. John prepared a simple meal, bread, fresh fruit, and cheese, and they sat together, sharing stories in the warm sunlight streaming through the windows. Maka spoke of her childhood, the stories her grandmother had told her, and the traditions of her Apache heritage. She described the way her family lived, the importance of community, and the respect they held for the land. John listened intently, fascinated by the richness of her experiences. "I never realized how connected you were to your land," John said thoughtfully. "It reminds me of this place. Even though it's different, there's a similarity, the need to care for the land and the life it gives you." Maka nodded. "Yes, the land is life. It teaches you patience, strength, and respect. You don't always control it, but you learn to live with it." Their conversation moved naturally, flowing from small stories to larger reflections on life. John spoke of his years on the ranch, the challenges he had faced, and the quiet satisfaction he found in simple routines. Maka listened with interest, seeing a life so different from her own yet strangely comforting. It was in these moments that their bond began to deepen, not through shared dangers or hardships, but through understanding and respect. In the afternoon, John suggested a short walk along a nearby stream. The water glistened in the sunlight, and the soft sound of flowing water created a soothing rhythm. They walked slowly, side by side, allowing silence to fill the spaces between words. Sometimes no words were needed. The presence of another human being, someone who offered trust and safety, was enough to heal wounds that could not be seen. Maka spoke again, this time about her fears. "I was scared last night," she admitted quietly. "Not just of them, of being alone. I've never run from anyone before, never felt so vulnerable. But being here with you, it feels different. I feel safe." John nodded. "It's normal to feel scared after what you've been through, but you're not alone anymore." "I'll make sure of that." Maka looked at him, her eyes reflecting gratitude and a growing trust. It was a simple truth, but it carried immense weight. She had faced terror, survived. And now she was learning that there were people in the world who would stand by her without expecting anything in return. As they walked, Maka noticed small details. The way birds flitted from tree to tree, the patterns of sunlight on the water, and the subtle rustle of leaves in the wind. These were things she had not paid attention to in weeks or perhaps months. Fear had dominated her senses, leaving no room for the quiet beauty around her. Now slowly, she was able to notice and appreciate the world again. By late afternoon, they returned to the ranch. John suggested some rest, knowing that the physical and emotional exhaustion of the past days could take a toll. Maka agreed, settling into a chair near the fireplace with a blanket over her shoulders. John busied himself with small tasks, giving her space while keeping an eye on her. Maka reflected quietly on the events that had brought her here. The terror of last night, the uncertainty of her journey, and the sudden kindness she had encountered. It was a lot to process. Yet in this quiet space, she felt a sense of healing beginning. Not all wounds could be seen or treated with medicine. Some needed time, trust, and a safe place to mend. Later, John suggested a small project to keep her occupied. A simple repair on one of the fences that had been damaged in a recent storm. Maka agreed, feeling eager to contribute and feel useful again. They worked together, passing tools back and forth, measuring, hammering, and securing the boards. It was simple labor, yet it brought a sense of purpose and accomplishment. "You have a good eye for details," John remarked, watching her inspect the fence. Maka smiled faintly. "I've always noticed things. It helps you survive, and it helps you understand the world better." By evening, the fence was fixed, and the ranch seemed more peaceful than ever. They prepared a small dinner together, sharing quiet conversation and laughter. Maka began to feel more comfortable in John's presence, sensing that she could truly relax for the first time since the escape. After dinner, they sat by the fire, the warmth and flickering light creating a comforting atmosphere. Maka felt a sense of gratitude she could not fully express. John had offered her safety, kindness, and understanding without asking anything in return. It was a rare gift, and she realized that it was changing her, giving her hope for the future. "I've learned something important today," Maka said softly, looking into the fire. "Even when everything feels lost, there is still hope. There are still people who care, and even in fear there can be kindness." John nodded. "That's true. And sometimes helping someone else helps you too. It reminds you why life is worth living." Maka smiled faintly. She felt stronger now, not just physically but emotionally. She had survived a terrible night, found safety, and begun to rebuild trust in others. It was a slow process, but she knew that step by step she could heal. The night grew quiet, and Maka finally retired to the small cot by the fireplace. She felt a sense of peace settling over her, a feeling that had been absent for far too long. John checked on her one last time, ensuring that the fire was safe and the room warm. "You rest now," he said gently. "Tomorrow is another day and we'll face it together." Maka nodded, closing her eyes. For the first time in many days, she felt safe enough to sleep fully, to let her body and mind recover. She thought of her family, of the journey that still lay ahead, and of the strange twist of fate that had brought her to John's ranch. As she drifted off, she realized that healing was more than physical. It was emotional and mental, built on trust, understanding, and connection. John had given her that gift, and for that she felt a quiet, enduring gratitude. Outside, the stars twinkled over the plains, and the ranch lay peaceful and calm. Inside, two lives had begun to intertwine, different worlds brought together by chance, courage, and kindness. It was the start of a friendship built on respect, trust, and the understanding that even in a world filled with fear, there could still be safety, compassion, and hope. Maka would never forget the day. Not just for the terror she had escaped, but for the quiet strength she had discovered within herself and the connection she had found with another human being. That day marked a turning point, a moment when fear began to fade, replaced by trust, understanding, and the possibility of a brighter tomorrow. The morning air was crisp and cool, and the sunlight slowly stretched across the wide plains surrounding the ranch. Birds chirped softly, and the faint rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze made the world feel calm and peaceful. For Maka, the past few days had been a mixture of fear, relief, and gradual healing. She had begun to feel safer, more grounded, and even a little at home on the ranch. John, too, was quietly proud of how far she had come, seeing her slowly regain her strength and confidence. However, neither of them could ignore the lingering unease that came with the memory of the night she had fled for her life. John knew, deep down, that the threat may not have fully disappeared. The men who had chased Maka might return, and if they did, they could be dangerous. He resolved to prepare, not only to protect the ranch but also to ensure that Maka remained safe. Over breakfast, John and Maka spoke quietly about the possibility. "Do you think they'll come back?" Maka asked, her voice tinged with concern. John sighed, choosing his words carefully. "I don't know for sure, but it's possible. Sometimes people don't give up so easily, but we can prepare and be ready. You won't have to face them alone." Maka nodded, a mixture of worry and determination in her eyes. "I don't want to run again. I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want to face it if it comes and protect myself." John smiled faintly, impressed by her courage. "Then we'll face it together, but we need to be smart, not reckless. Planning is just as important as courage." The day began with practical preparations. John showed Maka how to check the fences, secure the gates, and set up simple warnings in case anyone approached the ranch unexpectedly. He also taught her how to move quietly, stay alert, and notice small signs in the environment that could indicate danger. Maka absorbed everything carefully, her focus sharp and determined. "I've never done anything like this before," she admitted as they worked. "But I feel capable, like I can actually protect myself, not just run." John nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit. Strength isn't just about fighting. It's about being aware, prepared, and confident in your decisions. You've already survived so much. You can handle this." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they practiced simple drills together, moving quietly through the fields, checking the perimeters and communicating without speaking loudly. Maka quickly learned to anticipate John's movements and to notice subtle changes in the environment. Her instincts, honed during the terrifying night of her escape, were sharper than she had realized. By afternoon, they took a break near the stream that ran through the ranch. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the sound of it flowing over rocks brought a soothing rhythm. Maka sat on a large rock, watching the water, her mind reflecting on everything she had learned. "You've taught me so much," she said softly. "Not just about surviving, but about trusting someone, about being strong in ways I didn't understand before." John smiled, glad that she was absorbing the lessons not just physically, but emotionally. "Trust and strength are connected," he said gently. "When you know someone is on your side, you can be stronger than you ever imagined. That doesn't mean danger disappears, but it means you can face it without fear controlling you." As the day moved toward evening, John and Maka were returning from the fields when John noticed something unusual near the edge of the forest. A shadow moved between the trees, and for a moment he held his breath. It could have been a deer, but something about the movement seemed deliberate. "Maka," he said quietly, "stay close to me." Maka nodded, her body tensing slightly but her eyes focused. They moved carefully, watching the tree line. Another movement confirmed John's suspicions. Someone was watching the ranch, perhaps scouting, perhaps planning. The men who had chased Maka might indeed be returning. "We need to act carefully," John whispered. "But we also need to be ready to defend ourselves if necessary." They quickly went inside, making sure all the doors and windows were secured. John instructed Maka to stay close and remain quiet. They listened intently, waiting for any sound that could indicate approach. The tension was high, yet there was also a quiet confidence in their movements. They were prepared, aware, and working together. Hours passed with only small signs of movement outside. Maka remained calm, trusting John's guidance. She realized that her fear, though natural, was no longer controlling her. She was learning to rely on both her instincts and the support of another person. As night fell, the shadows in the forest grew longer and the world seemed more mysterious. Maka felt her heart pound with a mix of fear and determination. She remembered the terror of the previous night, but now she felt different. She was not alone. She was prepared, and she had someone she trusted beside her. Suddenly, a noise broke the quiet, the faint crack of a branch in the distance. John immediately signaled Maka to stay low and move quietly with him. They watched as a figure emerged from the tree line, then another and another. The men had returned. John whispered a plan. "Stay behind me. We don't want to fight if we don't have to, but if we must, we'll be ready." Maka's pulse raced, but she followed his lead, keeping low and moving silently. She realized that despite the fear, she felt a sense of control she had never had before. Her training with John, her awareness, and her courage were all coming together at this moment. The men approached the edge of the ranch, unaware that John and Maka were watching. John had positioned himself so that the ranch house provided cover, and Maka stayed close, ready to move at a moment's notice. The intruders looked around, clearly searching for something or someone, but they did not immediately spot the two of them. "Remember," John whispered, "stay calm. Watch carefully. We'll handle this." The men moved closer, their voices low but harsh. Maka listened, picking up bits of their conversation, realizing that they were the same group that had chased her before. Her fear tried to rise, but she pushed it down, relying on the preparation and guidance John had given her. For a tense few minutes, they observed the intruders, waiting for the right moment to act. John and Maka knew they could not let the men enter the house. The ranch was their safe place, and it had to be defended. Finally, John made a move, stepping into a position where he could be seen without exposing himself to danger. "You're not welcome here," he called firmly. "Leave now and no one gets hurt." The men paused, clearly surprised by the calm, confident voice. Maka realized that John's presence alone, combined with their readiness, was giving them power. They hesitated, unsure whether to advance or retreat. Maka spoke softly, almost instinctively. "Go back," she said, her voice steady. "You won't get anything here." Her voice, combined with John's, seemed to give the intruders pause. They looked at each other, uncertain. Finally, after a tense moment, they retreated, disappearing back into the forest. The threat had passed for now. Maka let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. She looked at John, gratitude and relief shining in her eyes. "We did it," she said softly. "We protected the ranch." John nodded, smiling faintly. "Yes, we did. And we did it together." For the rest of the night, they stayed alert, ensuring that no one returned. The ranch was quiet again, the stars shining over the plains and the gentle wind rustling through the trees. Maka realized that the fear of the past had not disappeared entirely, but she had learned something far more important. She could face danger with courage, preparation, and trust. As they finally sat by the fire, their hearts still beating from the adrenaline, Maka felt a deep sense of connection to John. He had not only saved her physically, but had taught her how to face fear and uncertainty with strength. For the first time since the terrifying night that had brought her here, she felt empowered and confident. "I can face anything now," Maka said quietly, looking into the fire. "Not alone, but with someone I trust, and that makes all the difference." John nodded. "That's the most important lesson. Fear is natural, but courage comes when you face it together." The night grew calm, and Maka finally lay down on the small cot near the fireplace. She felt a sense of peace and accomplishment, knowing that they had faced danger and emerged stronger. The lessons of trust, preparation, and courage would stay with her forever. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the quiet promise of safety and hope. Inside, two lives had grown closer, bonded by shared fear, bravery, and understanding. The ranch remained a place of refuge, and Maka knew that no matter what lay ahead, she could face it, because she was no longer alone, and she had learned the strength that came from trust, courage, and preparation. The sun rose gently over the ranch, casting long golden rays. Across the fields, the morning air felt lighter, fresher, as if the world itself had been cleansed after the tense events of the previous night. Maka woke slowly, feeling the calmness around her. For the first time in days, she did not feel the heavy weight of fear pressing on her chest. The night's danger had passed, and she had survived, not just physically but emotionally. She had grown stronger, braver, and more confident. John was already outside, tending to the cattle as usual. When Maka stepped onto the porch, she felt a sense of gratitude and warmth that she could not fully express. He looked up from his work and smiled, noticing her steady, calm presence. "Good morning," he said. "Sleep well," Maka nodded. "Yes." "Better than I have in a long time," she replied softly. "Thank you for everything you've done for me." John shook his head. "You've done just as much for yourself. You survived, you learned, and you faced your fears. I only guided you." Maka smiled faintly, realizing he was right. She had taken each step herself, making choices, facing danger, and trusting not only him but also herself. She felt proud of her courage, proud of how far she had come in such a short time. After breakfast, they walked through the ranch together, taking stock of everything. The fences were secure, the animals were safe, and the land seemed calm and peaceful once again. Maka's eyes swept over the fields, noting the beauty she had not noticed in weeks. The way the sunlight glimmered on the grass, the soft sway of the trees, and the gentle flow of the stream. It was a world she had almost forgotten existed in the chaos of fear, but now it seemed vibrant and full of possibility. "I feel different," Maka admitted quietly. "Like I can breathe again, like I have control over my life, not just running from it." John nodded. "That's the power of courage and trust. You've faced danger, and you've learned that you don't have to face it alone. That makes all the difference." As the day passed, they shared stories of their lives, laughing and talking as though they had known each other for much longer than a few days. Maka spoke of her family, of the small traditions and rituals that had shaped her childhood, and of the values she carried with her from her community. John shared memories of growing up on the ranch, of the challenges he had faced, and the quiet joys of living close to nature. Through their conversation, Maka realized how much she had learned from him, not just practical skills for survival, but life lessons about trust, courage, and resilience. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that their paths had crossed in a way that had changed her life. By late afternoon, John suggested they take a walk toward the edge of the forest, where Maka had first been found. "I want you to see it from a different perspective," he said. "You were scared when you came through here, but now you're strong. It's time to remember, not just fear." Maka hesitated for a moment, the memory of the terror she had felt threatening to overwhelm her, but then she took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, I want to face it," she said, her voice steady. "I want to see it not as fear, but as proof of what I survived." They walked together through the trees, the sunlight filtering through the leaves and casting dancing shadows on the ground. Maka's eyes scanned the area, noting the spots where she had hidden, the paths she had taken, and the rocks she had jumped over. She remembered the fear, but now it felt distant, replaced with a quiet pride. She had survived. She had faced danger and lived. "This place, it doesn't feel so terrifying anymore," Maka said softly. "I see it and I remember fear, but I also remember strength. I remember courage." John nodded. "That's the difference. The past shapes us, but it doesn't control us. You've learned to face it, and that's what matters." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple, Maka and John returned to the ranch. The animals were calm, the wind carried a gentle fragrance of earth and grass, and the world seemed to exhale a quiet relief. Maka felt a sense of closure, a feeling that she had reclaimed control over her life. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Maka reflected on everything that had happened. She thought of the terrifying night when she had run through the forest, the fear that had consumed her, and the danger that had seemed impossible to escape. She thought of John, who had given her safety and guidance, who had shown her that trust and courage could coexist. And she thought of herself and the strength she had discovered within. "I still remember what happened last night," she said softly, almost to herself, but John heard her. "But I don't feel afraid anymore. I feel alive, strong, grateful." John looked at her, his expression calm and warm. "That's a good place to be. Remembering is important, but it shouldn't hold you back. It should remind you of how far you've come." Maka smiled, feeling a sense of peace she had not known for a long time. She realized that her journey had not just been about surviving a single night, but about discovering resilience, courage, and the power of human kindness. She had faced danger, learned to trust, and found strength she never knew she had. Over the next few days, Maka prepared to return to her community. She knew she could not stay at the ranch forever, but she also knew that she carried with her the lessons she had learned. She had survived, she had grown stronger, and she had experienced the quiet but profound power of trust and connection. Before leaving, she turned to John, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving me, for teaching me, and for showing me that even in fear there can be hope." John shook his head, smiling faintly. "You don't need to thank me. You did all the hard work yourself. You survived, you learned, and you grew stronger. I only helped you see it." Maka nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She had faced her fears, protected herself, and learned to trust again. She had discovered courage, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving and healing. As she walked away from the ranch, feeling the grass beneath her feet and the wind in her hair, Maka felt a sense of freedom and possibility. The world was vast and sometimes dangerous, but she was ready. She knew that she could face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with courage, trust, and the memory of what she had survived. The journey back to her community was filled with reflection. She thought of her family, the values she carried, and the strength she had gained. She knew she would never forget the night she had run through the forest, the fear she had felt, or the kindness of the stranger who had saved her. But she also knew that she would carry forward the lessons of courage, resilience, and trust, and that they would guide her in the days and years to come. When she finally arrived, her family embraced her with tears and relief. She shared her story with them, not in fear, but with pride and a newfound understanding of her own strength. She realized that surviving danger was not just about avoiding harm. It was about discovering the power within, the ability to face fear, and the importance of trust and connection. That evening, as Maka sat with her family, she thought back to the ranch, to John, and to the quiet strength she had discovered there. She knew that she would never forget the lessons she had learned, the courage she had found, or the trust that had allowed her to heal. And in that moment, she understood something profound. That life, even in its most terrifying moments, could teach resilience, hope, and the power of human kindness. The stars shone above her community as night fell, and Maka felt a sense of calm and fulfillment. She had survived, she had grown, and she had learned that even in fear, there could be trust, strength, and hope. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative, leaving her stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever the future might hold. Maka knew that the memory of the terrifying night would always remain, but it would no longer define her. Instead, it would serve as a reminder of her courage, her resilience, and the kindness of those who had helped her along the way. She had faced darkness and survived, and that knowledge gave her a quiet but powerful strength that would last her a lifetime. As she closed her eyes that night, surrounded by her family, Maka whispered a silent promise to herself, to carry forward the lessons she had learned, to face life with courage and trust, and to never forget that even in the darkest moments, there could be light, safety, and hope.